Chapter 6. The Nazi Net Ensnares Holland. Sitzkrieg, the Sitting War, lasted through the spring of 1940. The world watched the stalemate, knowing that real war would soon be upon them. Tension ran high in the Low Countries, where leaders proudly proclaimed neutrality. Would Germany respect these neutral claims? Or would Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands be the next victims on Hitler's path to destruction? In Amsterdam, capital of the Netherlands, Helen, Siegfried, and thousands of other Jews listened nervously to the news reports. We had planned a housewarming party for a friend on Saturday, March 11th, when we heard rumors that the Dutch army had been put on alert. Siegfried, always the practical planner, suggested that we take our children with us to the party and spend the night, in case something was brewing. Our plans were all in vain. The party never happened, for early in the morning hours of May 10th, all hell broke loose. We were awakened by the roar and flak of hundreds of airplanes. The radio announced the Blitzkrieg invasion by German paratroopers who had parachuted into the country that morning at 3 a.m. Hitler had done it again. With the speed of lightning, the Sitzkrieg turned to Blitzkrieg. Ignoring the Low Countries' pleas to remain neutral, German troops descended upon them. Once again, the Nazis claimed their attack was defensive. Britain and France, said Hitler, were secretly planning to invade Germany through the Low Countries. To thwart this attack, he had ordered German troops to march into France directly through neutral countries of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. On the day of the invasion, Britain's Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, resigned. He knew he could not face the storm that was about to break. Winston Churchill replaced him, promising to fight the war at all cost. For without victory, there is no survival. And then, in a speech that became famous, he added, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat." In the Netherlands, the tension was tremendous. Both Dutch citizens and Jewish refugees watched in horror as German armies overran their country and paratroopers descended from the skies. On the first night, some friends came over. Together we did not feel so helpless, but we did realize that Holland was powerless to stop the wave that would eventually swallow us all. There were serious discussions of suicide. We knew how desperate our situation was. This move had destroyed all hope of our ever leaving Europe. Over Dutch radio, we heard the order that all German citizens were under house arrest and not allowed on the streets. Now, not only were we hunted Jews of Germany, as German citizens, we were enemies of Holland as well. The morning after the attack, the food stores opened at the regular time, and although our men did not go to work, we women went to the store to get supplies. German forces pounded the Dutch. The heaviest attack was against the important shipping center of Rotterdam, a port on the North Sea, not far from Amsterdam. In the attack on the city, 980 people were killed and nearly 20,000 buildings destroyed. Helen, Siegfried, and their friends followed the events on their radio. Soon after the bombing raid, a rumor began to spread that fanned a small flame of hope among us. A British ship was said to be waiting in the Dutch harbor city of Ijmuiden in the North Sea. It would take anyone wishing to go to England. But how would we get to Ijmuiden? We were no longer allowed to leave our house, and we had no means of transportation. Very much against Siegfried's wishes, I walked the streets to find a taxi willing to drive us. I found none. Much later, we learned that Siegfried's cousins had tried to contact us, but our telephone lines were cut. Although the ship was only half filled, it left that afternoon. Siegfried's relatives had reached the port and were able to sail safely to England. We remained trapped in Holland. The Dutch army battled bravely for 4.5 days, but it was no match for the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe forces. On May 14th, Holland surrendered. Barely slowing their pace, the German troops pressed on through Belgium and Luxembourg, headed toward France. In vain, the Allies tried to stop them. Their forces were quickly overrun by the superior German military. As they moved south, overtaking Belgium and Luxembourg, Germans managed to trap a huge number of Allied soldiers in a pocket of land on the French side of the English Channel, around the city of Dunkirk, close to the Belgian border. On May 26th, more than 800 boats, everything from military ships to private fishing craft, began loading soldiers at Dunkirk to take them across the English Channel to Britain in safety. That same day, Hitler finally ordered his troops to attack Dunkirk, but that order came too late to stop what became one of the greatest evacuations in military history. Nazi troops marched into France's capital city of Paris on June 14th. Fighting continued for several days, but the French army could not hold out against the powerful Wehrmacht. It looked like Hitler could not be stopped. With much of Europe now under his belt, people expected the Führer would attack Great Britain next. To rally the British people, Prime Minister Winston Churchill made another of his famous speeches. "Let us brace ourselves to our duties," he said, "and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will say, 'This was their finest hour.'" From Holland, Helen and Siegfried watched the development with deepening gloom. At first, life in Amsterdam under Nazi occupation seemed endurable. We could stand it. But when the Germans overran Belgium and France, depression and hopelessness overcame us. Siegfried, the rational, organized thinker, and always the pessimist, developed a theory. He was certain that if the Germans did not attack England next, the delay would cost them the war. He was unclear when this would be, or if we would be alive by then, but he made the preparations he considered necessary. One day, he predicted, we would be forced to go into hiding. This meant we would have to give up our little girl, for children could not be expected to live 24 hours a day inside a small room, never allowed to go outside. We wanted 3-year-old Doris to have every chance to stay alive, even if it were not possible for us. And we knew that to do this, we would have to send her away to live with a non-Jewish family. To make the separation easier, we began to distance ourselves from her. We stopped hugging, holding, or kissing her. It was very hard for us to treat our own child this way, but we thought it would be best for her. Looking back, I'm not so sure this was right, but who can judge at such moments? It looked like Siegfried's theory might prove true. On July 2nd, 1940, Hitler launched Operation Sea Lion, his code name for the invasion of Britain. With the confidence of his other quick victories behind him, he ordered the Luftwaffe to pound England relentlessly. Within a short period, he told his officers, "You will wipe the British Air Force from the sky." Once the Royal Air Force was destroyed, the invasion of Britain would be quick and simple, Nazi leaders figured. But this time it wasn't so easy. The British people held out with amazing endurance as German Stukas struck RAF bases around London, killing thousands of British citizens. On August 25th and 26th, the RAF struck back by sending its own bombers to attack the German capital of Berlin. This move angered Hitler intensely. In his rage over the bombing of Berlin, the German leader ordered the Luftwaffe to change its target to the city of London rather than the RAF bases. A bad military decision. September 15th, the Battle of Britain Day, was supposed to have been a victorious German climax to a summer of heavy fighting. On this day, the Luftwaffe was to launch a daylight attack on London. Instead, the day turned to defeat. For the first time since Hitler came to power, the German military machine showed signs of weakness. RAF pilots shot down nearly 60 German aircraft, but the Luftwaffe was able to down only 26 RAF planes. Failing to destroy the British Air Force meant that the Germans were not prepared to launch the invasion of Britain. At first it was postponed. Later, it was canceled. Siegfried had been right. The failure to invade Britain proved to be a major mistake for Germany. But the blunder did little to help his and Helen's situation. Their lives remained a nightmare. The Nazi net was now choking most Jews in the Netherlands. Government agencies were forbidden to hire Jewish workers and were told to fire those already employed. Jewish newspapers were shut down. In Amsterdam, Nazi stormtroopers began terrorist attacks on the section of the city where many poorer Jewish families lived. Groups of Jews, particularly students, organized themselves to fight the Dutch Nazis and the German police. But when one uprising ended in the death of a stormtrooper, the Nazis reacted with the same wrath they had shown on Kristallnacht. Immediately, they sealed off Jewish sections of the city and shipped more than 400 young people to concentration camps. Within a few months, most of them were dead. Throughout the Netherlands, desperate Jews began making plans that they hoped would keep them alive. Although Helen and Siegfried knew that they might have to go into hiding, they had no way of knowing when. They had to prepare themselves, and there were many details to arrange. We knew we would trust our old friend Abe Rusnick. Long before the time came to leave, we sold him everything in our apartment: our books, silver, china, linens, typewriter, clothing, and other items. Abe paid us, but only on paper, not in cash. We would use these items as long as we were able to stay in our home. Then Abe would store them for us. Many months later, when German officers arrived at his house to confiscate our belongings, Abe protested that they were his and promptly produced the receipt that we had signed. The Germans had to pay him the full value of his belongings. Abe saved the money for our use, and it came in very handy for us later. We also wanted a will directing our child's future. We suggested that Abe be Doris's guardian, but he had to refuse. As a good Catholic, he would gladly take her into his home, but he would have to raise her as a Catholic. We did not want Doris brought up in any religion. Instead, we wanted her exposed to choices, so that at 18 she could make up her own mind. Helen and Siegfried feared that they had little time to spare. Across Europe, Nazis were stepping up their terrorism against the Jews. Soon after conquering Poland, they began building concentration camps there to house Jews and other enemies of the Reich. The camps in Germany were simply not large enough to hold the thousands of people now being arrested every day. One of the first camps built in Poland was Stutthof, near the city of Danzig, known today as Gdansk. In all, more than 110,000 prisoners, Siegfried among them, would pass through Stutthof. Only a few would survive. To the south, near the Polish town of Oswiecim, close to the Czechoslovakian border, a small camp was being expanded. After remodeling, this would be the largest of all the Nazis' KZs, the Konzentrationslagers. This new camp would have a special function. It would be used for the planned, purposeful killing of thousands of people every day. Unlike the many concentration camps throughout the Reich, where the people died of starvation, illness, or overwork, this camp had the equipment to exterminate, to intentionally kill most of its prisoners. By the end of the war, nearly 2 million people would perish in this hellhole called Auschwitz.